Hey everyone, welcome to Careers on the Move, presented by Cargomatic. I'm your host, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for joining me here on the show today, where we talk to the most interesting people in the world of supply chain about their careers, their path to this point, and we just learn a little bit more about them. And so we're excited to welcome to the show today Craig Fuller, the CEO of FreightWaves. Craig, thank you so much for joining us.
Tyler, great to be here.
Well, Craig, give us a sense of what your role is at FreightWaves. I mentioned you're the CEO, obviously, so you're kind of the man in charge, but describe your role to us and tell us what you do on a day-to-day basis.
So I'm a founder, which is the greatest title that anybody can have because you have responsibilities, you have respect to the team, but you also get the opportunity to hire professional management that actually keeps the business running and intact. So being a founder, I also have the CEO title. But I'm more proud of my founder title because it means that I was here when the business started and helped to essentially birth it and grow it. Now it's in college, and we have professional management that's running the business day to day so that I don't screw it up.
I like the way that you put that. Now that it's in college, it's a little bit more mature, it's setting out on its own and that sort of thing. So tell me about that day to day then for you. Now that the business has kind of reached this point, what's that look like from your perspective, being a founder and then also being the CEO and having this team that's also kind of running the business on a day to day basis?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, founders are, if you think about what I do on a day-to-day basis, is basically new ideation. Oftentimes founders are the ones that have the crazy ideas or are very risk willing, if you will, and attracted to new concepts. And that certainly, I fit that definition. But I'm our biggest evangelist. So I'm out, talking about what we're doing, being the big evangelist for the company. So evangelizing the mission, evangelizing the company's brand, all of those elements. I'm involved in obviously dealing with investors and raising capital if that's needed, but also developing strategy. So any of the new businesses or products that we'll offer or we'll launch, I certainly am involved in those. Any M&A or merger, acquisitions that we may be looking at, involved in those. But I don't have a functional role in many ways. If I were to get hit by a car, the company would still thrive because what I've tried to do is build professional management that can keep it running. I'd like to think that the business will be worth more if I'm involved, but functionally as the largest shareholder of the company, I also want the business to be successful with or without me. And that's been my primary mission, to essentially fire me from every job that I've ever had.
Well, absolutely, Craig. I think that's a great way to put it. And so just give the audience an idea of what FreightWaves does, the services that you provide or the products that you have.
So we have two primary business units that have multiple product iterations in each, but effectively we're often called the Bloomberg of freight. A large piece of our business is media. So we have a streaming over-the-top TV network, which gets about 40,000 viewers per day. We have a text-based media, which is basically articles. We're putting out 50 articles a day, which gets about 1 million unique visitors a month. And so putting out significant content and context about the logistics industry. This is an industry that very few people that are not active in it really think about. I often describe logistics and supply chain very similar to the way you think of your power company. Tyler, you being a Texan, certainly appreciate when the power goes out, all of a sudden you're aware and thinking about your power company. It's much like in logistics. A lot of people don't think about supply chain and logistics unless something has been disrupted. And during COVID, everybody got to experience firsthand the sensitivities, but also the resilience of the supply chain. And so our business is putting out information, context, news, and content related to this massively important industry, which employs millions of people across the country and tens of millions across the globe. We also have a very large data business, which provides real-time information and analytics about what's happening around the global supply chain, around freight demand. So things like freight pricing, capacity, supply and demand elements. We're tracking all of that and providing that data to companies that are in the market that are responding to the developments that take place.
I think that content creation aspect is really fascinating to me. Did you find that this was maybe an underserved industry in terms of the news and information that was out there, and saw a real need to create content and to create things that people could consume in this world of logistics?
Yeah, I never imagined I would be running a media company, and we never set out to be a media company. When I first started FreightWaves in 2016, it wasn't even a thought. In fact, when we raised our first seed round in late 2017, it didn't even make the investor pitch deck. So it was really an evolution. And effectively, what happened is, when I first started this business, the idea was to start a futures market based on trucking. Basically, the idea that people could trade to de-risk their exposure to spot prices, or could trade to speculate on the direction of the freight market. What we realized is that in order to do that, we had to evangelize. We needed people to be aware of what we were trying to accomplish. To really build a financial market, you have to have people that understand what's happening, can project it. So one of the ways we wanted to evangelize it was talking to traditional media that was in the space, that was connected to the logistics industry. But what's interesting about B2B media is that oftentimes these very large and mature industries are often underserved by media outlets that provide real-time information. And so I would do an interview and it would be published 6 months later in a magazine. And it struck me as quite strange that you had this industry that's vital to the economy, that's constantly changing, whether it's weather or technology or all this stuff that's taking place. And it's so critical to the global economy and our well-being. But there's no what I would call business news or real-time news that was a part of this industry. So as part of our roadmap to build our financial markets business, we started talking to a lot of the traditional publishers. A lot of them couldn't understand it. They even, in many ways, refused or wouldn't publish articles about us because they just didn't believe in it. Even my local newspaper in Chattanooga, Tennessee, didn't publish a press release that we did about our funding. So it was a difficult road, but I ended up talking to some PR agencies. And if you know anything about PR agencies, oftentimes they're some of them you can find some that will take on they're not very reputable, that will take on anybody. But we even got the door shut on us there. And so the message was, this is a difficult concept for people to get, and it's probably better that we source it ourselves or do our own content. So we hired a writer who was a journalist in freight, and he started publishing articles about what was happening. And this was about the time that Amazon had entered the logistics space, the time when you had this digital brokerage with, folks like Cargomatic that are taking venture capital and trying to digitize the industry. And all of this was happening. The industry itself was very cynical and skeptical about the resilience of these businesses, whether this digitization would stay. And the tech media was enamored with this industry that they never thought about, which was supply chain and logistics. We just happened to be in both sides of the world. We were a tech-centric company that had taken venture capital, so we understood what that meant and how to describe it. At the same time, we were industry participants that understood what was really going on in this industry and how important it was. And I think that authentic voice helped us build a community, helped us build an audience, and that ultimately became our media business, which is really a content-supported SaaS business. We use our media voice to bring interest to our data products.
I think that's a fantastic way of putting it. And I wonder, it feels like that was kind of the perfect storm of right things all coming together at the right time to kind of launch you forward. What has this past year been like? Because this has been obviously a year unlike any of us have really experienced before. Did you find that with things moving and changing as quickly as they have over the past year, and supply chain becoming just such a huge topic of conversation, even in the mainstream, as we talk about vaccines and things along those lines, has this year brought about more change and maybe more eyeballs and interest in supply chain than we've ever really seen before?
Yeah, Tyler, it's better to be lucky than smart in business, especially as a founder, because oftentimes founders' successes, businesses, and you can go look at really any successful business. A lot of times the people have attempted to start those types of businesses before. It's just that you have the right timing, the right set of ingredients, hopefully the right founding team and set of investors that are willing to support the business, that when that comes together, it's almost like magic. And that's what happened for us. And we're seeing it play out in the logistics space right now. And so if you think to what happened during COVID, I think the sort of the brilliance of this industry or the resilience of this industry was played out in real time for people who didn't think about it. You would walk into the grocery store one evening and there would be There wouldn't be any meat. You may not have toilet paper. You may not have really, critical items for your family. Maybe if you have, young children, you don't have formula or diapers. And then you walk in the very next morning and the aisles are full of all this stuff. Well, that's the supply chain. That's logistics playing out in real time. And certainly for our business, because we are providing information, whether it's data that essentially is a near real-time basis, or content, which is helping to describe and provides news and information for our industry, it certainly was a massive tailwind for our business because we're able to talk about this major substantial event, and all of a sudden there's broad awareness and interest in what's going on. But I'll say this is, and I had one of our young journalists who had been here for a couple of years and joined our company in 2017. He told me, and this was probably 2019, 2 years into it, he goes, since I've been in this industry, there's been so much happening. It's never, his assumption was that this was all new and unique, and logistics is sort of this, even though he's been in it for 2 years, that somehow that the last couple of years were special and exceptional in the sense that things never disrupt the business. And it was a very naive statement by a really smart journalist, because the reality is that our industry is always responding to these types of events. And so we certainly didn't have a pandemic to respond to up until what we saw last year, but the logistics industry is always responding, whether it's hurricanes or snow events or power outages or just economic cycles or whatever is going on. The logistics industry is our front lines. And because it works so well, we oftentimes don't think about it.
Did you picture yourself getting into logistics? Was this always something that you were interested in, or a goal, or was it something that you maybe discovered a little bit later, or sometime in college, or something along those lines?
No, I have diesel in my blood. Probably literally have diesel in my blood. I was born into this industry. So my father started a company called U.S. Express, which is one of the largest trucking companies in the U.S. My uncle started a company called Covenant, which is, I think, the number 8 the largest trucking company in the U.S. So I literally was born into it. I couldn't get away from it. I tried to get away from it. I went into payments and fintech from 2005 to 2012 and spent time outside of this industry. And when I sold the business to U.S. Bank, spent 2 years working inside of that framework, wasn't happy as an entrepreneur and founder, wanted to sort of figure out what was next for me. And I didn't want to join the logistics industry. I just thought it was a space that I couldn't, in many ways, I didn't think about, this was not my own path. I wanted to do something that was sort of independent. But it was an interesting time because back in 2014, companies like Cargomatic were being funded. This was sort of early in their story. And venture capitalists were all of a sudden interested in logistics. And you had all of these things, whether it's the on-demand nature of the digital apps or, the investments that Amazon was making in its logistics infrastructure, or just what I would call sort of this Uberization or this gig economy was starting to pump a lot of money. Venture capitalists were really interested in the space. And so this became sort of, as a founder who's looking for the next sort of thing, it sort of drew me back into it. I initially did some consulting around the space with some early stage companies and realized that what this industry needed, and I saw in the financial services world, I saw in fintech, was it needed a community that could bring all of the innovators and the incumbents together to talk about innovation and could focus on it. And that's effectively what we tried to do here. So I think I have advantages that were, in many ways, I was born into, in the sense that it wasn't an industry that I had to go learn. I knew a lot about it before I ever started this business. And I had the advantage of a Rolodex. Now, one thing to sort of say is that my father did not invest in this business. He didn't put a dime in it. I just don't think he believed in the idea. I don't think he thought I would be a good CEO. And maybe he's right. As I sort of described, being a founder is more fun. But having said that, it's an industry I love. I'm super passionate about. And what I love about it is what's happening right now. I mean, we're living out, if you think of the equivalent of the internet, and I went to college in the mid 90s or, 97, 2001 down at Baylor, just south of where you're at. And what's amazing about what's happening in this industry is very similar to what happened in the early days of the internet, is that all of a sudden this massive digitization, these tech concepts like electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles and on-demand, they're all taking place in real time. And the logistics industry is driving this whole e-commerce boom that's taking place. And so I think it's just a fascinating time to be a part of it. And I don't think there's a better industry than logistics and supply chain and mobility to be a part of. I mean, if you're going to build a career in something, this is the industry you want to be in because it's so resilient and it's so critical. And because it's the intersection of the physical and digital, it's going to be around for decades to come.
I think that's a fantastic point, and you're at a really interesting space because you are on that content and information side, as well as having your roots in the supply chain and the logistics industry, just given your family's history, that you can kind of bring those worlds together. But it really does seem like, regardless of what your talents are or interests in, that there are careers in supply chain and logistics for a wide range of people. Like you have that entrepreneurial spirit, and we're able to start a company and found something in this world. But if someone else looks around and says, like, I really enjoy problem solving, or I like to get into the details and figure out how things work, it seems like logistics has so many different career type options for people, regardless of what your skills are.
Yeah, I think oftentimes people think of it as a niche. I was at a high school with at a school where a lot of kids go to, tier 1 Ivy League schools, in fact. So these are highly educated kids with really big ambitions. And one of the kids when I told him what I did, he was snarky about it. He goes, "Oh, that's an interesting niche." And I was like, "Well, it's 12% of global GDP. It's bigger than financial services and insurance combined." The logistics industry is 8.5% of U.S. domestic GDP. And if you compare that to financial services and insurance, they're 7.5%. So we're talking about an industry that is so big and so important. It's the number one employer in 29 states in the United States. So it's very, very massive. This is not a niche industry. 40% of the global economy are in logistics dependent industries, which is the equivalent of if they didn't have logistics, they would go out of business. And much like a software company, if it didn't have access to power, it would go out of business. And so it's a critical industry that's going through this rapid transformation, whether it's robotics or automation. And so it's an industry that provides so much opportunity and growth. And companies are having to figure out how to manage their logistics operations. And so they're looking for people that can help solve for that. Now, maybe you don't, if you're someone looking at your career, and maybe you haven't had an opportunity to learn data science or engineering, and you think, well, I'm not going to be able to do well. This is one of the industries that offers massive upward mobility. So you can have someone who joins the industry with a year of experience, and they can be making six figures in the right roles without a college degree. I know people that have done that. And so it's an industry that does offer a lot of upward mobility because it's so big and so significant. And if you've got someone hungry, they can learn the industry and they can go start their own franchise. They can start their own business. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that start out working for someone, learning how the industry operates, and have gone out to start very successful companies.
So what are the biggest stories that people should be following right now in the world of logistics? I'm guessing that COVID-19 obviously is still probably one of the primary stories that people are looking at. But from your perspective, just living in those two worlds, what stories and trends should people be following?
Well, it's interesting that COVID-19, we're here in March of 2021. So we've sort of lived beyond COVID in many ways. The COVID story, I hope we're at the tail end of that. We're in the ninth inning of the COVID story. So I hope that in many ways it's behind us. It was interesting a couple of months ago when the vaccine, before it was produced, everybody was sort of freaking out. Mainstream media was putting out a lot of articles about it. A lot of people were worried about how much vaccine was going through the supply chain, but it wasn't a ton. We're talking the equivalent of one Walmart's distribution center a day in terms of the amount of volume that it's moving. It was very insignificant. And so, but it did get a lot of attention. It's great for our industry. I remember watching CNN the day that the vaccines were being released, and they had this FedEx aircraft on the tarmac taking off. And I'm like, this is our D-Day. So it was sort of awesome to be living it out, seeing it as an industry professional, being very proud that our industry is on the front lines of helping bring it into this horrible and horrific crisis. So, but we think about COVID, that's going to be behind us in a few months. We'll certainly remember it. It's had an impact on our lives, but I don't think it's going to be something that our society will be facing indefinitely. We've hopefully learned from it and changed how we operate, but not something that we have to live with. But in terms of stories that are playing out, some of the stuff that COVID created or caused, if you will, are going to be playing out for decades to come. And it really isn't that this stuff we weren't eventually going to have deurbanization, or we weren't eventually going to have e-commerce. But what we saw was 10 years of innovation really packed into 4 to 5 months. And so if you think about that, now people have left big cities like New York and San Francisco and moved to places where there's a lot more land and space. They now desire yards. They desire the Dallas urban environment where you can get your house in a yard and you don't have to live in this big, massive urban center with everybody else. And it's interesting because that was accelerated during COVID, but that trend has actually been going on for many years. There was a study by the University of Kansas that written in 2005 about deurbanization. And it was basically predicting, and this trend had started in the early 2000s, is that as the internet became more ubiquitous, as people would start leaving these big urban centers, and as the millennials started to develop, want to have families and have kids, they want to leave the big urban centers. And that's been trending. Not a lot of people thought about it before COVID. And so now we have this deurbanization that's taking place. And that means logistics is that much more important, because now if you leave New York City or you leave downtown Dallas or you end up leaving San Francisco, you still want the same items that you could buy at the local bodega, or you still want the same items you could buy and shop for, and you want the same cadence. You want it right now. You don't want to wait for it. That creates a lot of pressure on logistics operators to respond to those demands. And so now there's a lot more inventory that's in the supply chain, so these items can be delivered on demand and in real time. And it requires logistics expertise and operations to manage it. You've seen the evolution of restaurants that figured out the delivery model or partnered to figure out the delivery model have survived, and many of them have thrived during this crisis, but many have not. And it's because they weren't set up, didn't think about, or didn't have the expertise on how to develop a delivery or takeout model. The ones that did quite well. The pizza companies and even the fast food restaurants that get a lot of their traffic from cars and windows have figured that out and actually done exceptionally well in this crisis. And I think that was inevitable at some point, but it's certainly been accelerated. So if you look at these e-commerce trends, we're going to see more of that continue to be a factor. We're going to see the Amazonization or Amazon and its impact on e-commerce and delivery. We're also going to see some emerging technology around autonomous vehicles, drones, the ability to, I think within the next couple of years, you will be flying product to your house. A drone will pick up something from a restaurant and deliver it to your house. We're right on the cusp of that. And not only product, but you will be getting in a drone and flying across town. So no more Dallas traffic sitting on I-35 waiting 45 minutes to get to North Dallas. You'll get in your drone and you'll take off. And those are things that are coming. This is what makes this industry so exciting.
Yeah, let's make that happen as soon as possible, because traffic is getting worse here. So yeah,
it's happening. So Uber and Bell Helicopter out of Fort Worth have picked the DFW Metroplex as one of the first cities to test this technology out. I think actually Uber sold off its drone to a company called Joby, which is trying to go public. But all of this stuff is happening. It's a fascinating time. And like I said, this is the internet of 1995. We're just seeing it play out in this industry that is at the intersection of the physical and the digital.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fascinating time, like you mentioned, to be a part of this industry. So if there's a college student out there who's thinking, maybe thinking about a career in supply chain, what's a piece of advice that you would give them to help them in their career, or just to kind of push them in the right direction?
Look, the key to winning any type of job, I learned this, I don't know to say the hard way, but I think it's the most effective advice. Something I didn't appreciate when I was in college was oftentimes the most successful way to get into an industry that you're passionate about is to network. It has never been easier to network with connected individuals that are a part of an industry that you're passionate about. So I don't care if it's logistics, supply chain, mobility, data, cloud computing, media, whatever you're passionate about. It's never been easier to connect with people that are a part of the industry. It does require effort because everyone else has figured this out as well. So you're going to have to work a little harder to make those outreaches, maybe a little bit more resilient in how you use them. But the tools that are LinkedIn, email, Twitter, all of that connectivity enables you to reach people that are in the industries that you want to be a part of. So if you decide that you like this conversation or more that are driven by the Cargomatic brand in this particular conversation, and you're interested in what's happening in and around the logistics space, then people like myself and the other guests that are on this show are great folks to network with. And, it doesn't take much to say, hey, I am a college student and I'm really interested in logistics. I think if you happen to tune into digital content like this show, it's always good to reference something that you learn or heard on the show, because someone who does a lot of this media stuff, we always like to know that people are listening to us. I get a lot of inbound activity. I'm sure, Tyler, you do as well. And so often, if it's very generic, I probably get 10, 20, 30 of these a day. I don't even, at some point, I just don't have time to respond to them. But if somebody says something that I said in a show, then I feel a degree of obligation, but also excitement and flattery that they've paid attention to what I had to offer and they want to know a little bit more. And so I'm more likely to take the time to speak with them. And I think that's what you can do as a college student is you don't have to know anything. The great thing about the logistics industry, supply chain industry, and most of these big, growing, emerging industries is there's a lot of people that are able to join in them and learn all about it from scratch with no prior understanding. And after a while, they can often share experiences and help you network and get situated so that you can grow your own careers inside of an industry like logistics.
So Craig, as we start to wrap up our conversation today, where can people find more about FreightWave and also connect with you if they're interested in networking and in learning a little bit more about what you do?
So FreightWaves.com is really easy. I mean, we put out a lot of content, about 50 articles a day, and we have podcasts, and we have TV, over-the-top streaming. So if you're interested in what's happening around logistics, certainly we have a platform to do that. I get a lot of LinkedIn requests, and unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of LinkedIn anymore. I used to be. I feel like a hypocrite because I talked about how great it is, and then I talk about it's got a lot of issues. Microsoft, please fix LinkedIn, but that's beside the point. Twitter, in my opinion, is the best way to reach executives like myself that are on Twitter. People that are active in putting out content tend to be big on Twitter. And so Twitter is the absolute best way to reach me because there's not a lot of people that cold market on Twitter. The challenge of LinkedIn is they're just blasting a lot of stuff. But Twitter remains a pretty easy way to network. It's also a great way to engage. So for me, Twitter is the best way to reach me. Certainly you can try LinkedIn, but there's a lot of junk mail that I get in there.
I feel that as well. Craig Fuller, CEO and founder of FreightWaves. Craig, thank you so much for joining us here on Careers on the Move and sharing your story, sharing your expertise and your insights, and having a great conversation. It's been a blast.
Yeah, Tyler, appreciate it. And best of luck with the show. And thanks for Cargomatic for having me on.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you for tuning into this episode of Careers on the Move from Cargomatic. Stay tuned for more episodes coming up soon. Make sure you bookmark this site or subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Wherever you choose to get your content, make sure to get more just like this. And stay tuned. We'll be back soon with more episodes. But until then, for Craig Fuller, our guest, I'm your host, Tyler Kern. We'll talk to you again soon.